for the Labor Market Information Office at DEED, and I work out of, I used to work out of the Tech College right in St. Cloud, and now working from home, and I cover Central and Southwest, so about 27 counties. And I'm going to give you a brief overview on the economic situation for our state and our region, and kind of dive just a little bit deeper into some of the impacts for all of you. And I'm try to keep my time short enough to maybe even share a little video at the end that you might be able to use to help with students or any projects with students, because they are kind of the future of our labor. So our unemployment rate has been dropping, and while this seems pretty like a pretty positive thing, it's dropping entirely because of people are leaving our labor force. So your unemployment rate is a formula of both folks in that are unemployed and employed, and we're declining both of those. So it's not necessarily the way you want to decrease your unemployment rate. We had peaked at a record rate in May, almost 10%. We don't seasonally adjust any sub-state areas. So if we look at St. Cloud, the MSA, which is Stearns and Benton counties combined, is about 4.7% compared to 4.6% for the state. That's unadjusted. In St. Cloud, we also have fewer workers than we did a year ago. So it's likely that we're experiencing the same effect where our unemployment rate is declining due to folks leaving the labor force. Our state lost about 50,000 jobs in December, which erased all the gains we had made from August through October. So we basically, in the state, lost jobs in March and April, and beginning in May, we had been clawing back those jobs. And then when COVID spiked again in the fall and resulted in more executive orders, that wiped out a lot of our jobs that we had gained back, and we saw spikes again in unemployment insurance claims and all that jazz. So it's you know, kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back here with the jobs. You know, we lost almost 400,000 jobs from February through April of 2020, and we've gained about 36% of those jobs back. Private sector's regained a little bit better than the public sector, and Minnesota is underperforming the nation in terms of over-the-year job losses. So for December, Minnesota's down about 8% in employment compared to last year, and the nation is down 6% compared to the previous December. This chart right here, and King will probably go much more into detail on the recessions here, but the recessions are highlighted. We officially entered a recession in February. That's when our employment started declining, which is interesting. You know, you have to meet certain benchmarks to actually start a recession. But if you remember back to last February, which feels like about 20 years ago now, you know, the whole pandemic, COVID-19, all that was, I don't even know if I knew what it was. People are still making jokes about it being the coronavirus, you know, and being hungover and stuff. I mean, it just wasn't in anybody's purview, yet our employment had already started to dip last February. And if we look in our state to see, you know, the impact on employment in different industries across our state, that's what the bar chart right here shows. In red is our most recent or current recession, and then the blue is the Great Recession. And what's interesting is you can see that some industries that were spared in the last recession are not this recession, such as healthcare. You can see the huge adjustment in basically 3 industries, other services, which includes like spas, salons, places like that, accommodation and food services, and arts, entertainment, and recreation. Those are really bearing the brunt of this recession. And manufacturing is one of the few that's actually coming out of this much better than the previous recession. Those 3 industries that are bearing the burden, if you will, you know, individually they don't add up to a huge share of our economy, but, you know, in aggregate, that's about 13% of our jobs in central Minnesota. And it's primarily in that accommodation and food services industry. You know, these are the industries that I'm most concerned about, long-term viability and establishment deaths. You know, what happens when these establishments go under and never come back and that employment is gone. If we look statewide, our most recent data to show our employment change was the third quarter of 2020. So comparing the third quarter of 2019 to the third quarter of 2020, we can see how job losses stack out. And it's about across the board, right? We have a little bit of gain in ag, forestry and fishing, you know, that's basically the ag sector there. And you can see the huge losses in accommodation and food services. Our state has roughly 61,000 fewer jobs than we did the previous third quarter. Manufacturing, you know, even though they had done good, I mean, it's doing comparatively better than the Great Recession, still massive employment decline in manufacturing, about 20,000 fewer jobs. And if we zoom in a little bit to our region, this is region 7W now, same type of information, but looking specifically at Stearns, Benton, Sherburne, and Wright County, we can see manufacturing with the most job losses, about 2,600 fewer jobs from the third quarter of 19 to 2020. And it's pretty obvious what the culprit is if we dive into manufacturing. It's that electrical equipment, appliance, and component manufacturing. And because I can't name names, you can all probably guess why that is. But aside from that, it'd be the fabricated metal products manufacturing, almost 450 fewer jobs. Printing, down about 300, textile. So this is what manufacturing looks like in our area. Again, for the 4-county area, comparing just employment from the third quarter of 2019 to the third quarter of 2020. Now moving on to unemployment insurance. So we've developed some new data sets to really help us understand more quickly what's going on in our economy. It's, you know, everything's happened so much quicker with this recession. It's just staggering, and the data that we used to use just didn't work. So we developed some new data on unemployment insurance, and I'll walk you through this. On the top here with all those vertical bars, that is daily applicants. And daily applicants, our application, initial claims, these could be deemed eligible or they're maybe denied, right? So this is looking at any application that came in. On a typical day in March, we handle roughly 300 to 400 claims a day. And that's what that green line across there just shows you, you know, what we would typically be doing for UI claims. And last March, we did over 30,000 claims one day. But for a few months, you know, well over 10,000 claims a day. So really stressing the capacity of our systems. You know, a lot of folks are redeployed just because we were never designed or capable of dealing with unemployment insurance claims at that level. Substantial. You can see then the lull throughout the summer and then the spike again in the fall as those executive orders came rolling through and a lot of folks were shut down again. Right now, we're looking at roughly 2,000 applicants per day. If you look at Stearns County, and this is statewide, but over a third of all of our workers have applied for UI. Not necessarily have received it, not necessarily still receiving it or anything like that. But if you've applied, I mean, it's likely that there's some sort of disruption in your job, which is staggering to think of that many people filing. Now we're going to move on to that map of Minnesota. That is our continued claims. So these are claims that are actually being paid out. They are exact. So these are folks that are receiving unemployment insurance, and they could be receiving it for a complete layoff or a reduction in hours, right? Because you can be eligible for a variety of different situations. So it's not necessarily a complete layoff, but you are eligible for unemployment insurance. And we're looking at the week ending, it was 2 weeks ago, I guess, is our most recent data that we have here. We have roughly 2.3 times more workers receiving benefits this December than last December in our region, which would be that Stearns, Benton, Sherburne, and Wright. You can see that on the right there, that blue chart. Again, this is continued claims. So it's similar, it's the same type of data that map is, and it's just monthly here, looking all the way back through the previous Decembers. And then you can see just how many more folks are receiving unemployment insurance this year than even the Great Recession. And a lot of that is due to changes in unemployment insurance eligibility and flexibility in filing. So many more people were eligible for unemployment insurance than what is typical. Also, work search requirements were relaxed. You know, typically to be eligible for unemployment insurance, you have to be looking for work, and that was no longer the case during the pandemic. Now, I also wanted to show you how this looks if we break it down by occupation. So when you file for unemployment insurance, you're asked a series of questions. Some of them are related to demographics, you know, what you do for a job, what type of industry you work in. Do you plan on going back? You know, do you think this is a permanent layoff or is it temporary? So from that information, which is completed by the applicant, so there could be a bit of error. And there's an unknown category here I didn't include just because it's not real helpful, but I wanted to show you the breakdown on the types of occupations. And when Amy and Les and I had talked yesterday, you know, they were talking about, you know, basically redeploying. How can we maximize this untapped labor that's been laid off? Well, kind of the first step is identifying who's laid off. And that is really what this table explains. So you can see construction there with the most amount of claims, and these are continued claims again, so they are they're eligible, and this is what was paid out, the amount of claims that were paid out 2 weeks ago. So you can see construction there with a
Have we lost sound for Luke?
I think so.
Yeah, I lost sound.
It appears that way. We'll see what happens.
Luke, if you can hear us, you were talking about construction, and that's when you went dead.
Right.
Maybe he has to get back on the call.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He's in the waiting room. Someone has to let him in.
This is Amy. We should be, please stand by. It should just be about just a couple seconds.
There we go.
Les, I wonder if we should talk about your birthday.
Uh-oh. Who's starting this? Is that Amy?
No,
Somebody else. Some of
you
my,
only turned 25 once.
right. I went by that 3 times now. It's, I don't know. Yeah, we have to do the soft shoe music here. But he should be, Amy getting him hooked back up. Because I know he had some problems yesterday, and the other technique was he called back on the phone.
While
I
we
can,
I can fumble a little bit, Amy, if you want.
Okay, is this Della?
Yeah, this is
All right.
Della.
While you
So
do that, I'll get in touch with him.
yeah, if you do that, and then I'll kind of see if people have questions and stuff on this. So as you were saying with the construction, you know, obviously it's winter, so there's a lot more unemployment claims in the construction field. So that's why you're seeing that right now. Usually we see that drop, you know, by early March or April.
Can anybody hear me?
Oh, here he
Woohoo.
is. Good
He's
job.
back.
Holy smokes. Hey, God, we must be on the cusp of self-driving cars if my phone can't even keep a conversation going on.
Don't
Yikes. All right,
get me
I'm sorry
started
about
on
that. For some reason,
technology.
oh yeah, I don't know why, but my phone just hung up on that. All right, so I'm gonna put this back in presenter mode. Can you see the slide again?
Those slides have been fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'll buzz through the rest of this. My apologies. But production there I highlighted. So those, you know, that's basically entirely in manufacturing there. And we still have a good amount of increase in production worker layoffs than compared to last year. I shouldn't say layoffs, but unemployment insurance claims that are being paid out. So at the bottom there, you can see that food prep and serving, you know, we typically in a December have, or in January, anytime, we have almost no unemployment insurance claims being paid out in food prep and serving. I think last year at this time we had like a dozen. This year we have, you know, just an insane amount. You know, especially for an occupation that's always hiring, you know, to have 900 folks that are unemployed in that. Just mind-boggling, not something that I'd really even ever thought about. So I'm going to move on to kind of the profile of folks that are at high risk of long-term unemployment. And I'll just kind of explain this chart here and I'll walk through a couple different demographics. But there's a few different ways that we're looking at, you know, what subpopulations are most at risk. So one of the ways you can look at it is the share of claimants. So on the top here, you can see about 74.5% of all unemployment insurance claims that are being paid out to white workers, compared to 10.5% to black workers. Now, if you compare that to their share of the labor force, you know, black workers are significantly overrepresented in unemployment insurance claims. They make up roughly half that rate in the labor force. So overrepresented there, so that's kind of a risk factor. The length of time that someone is receiving unemployment insurance, so the longer you receive unemployment insurance, the less likely it is for you to go back to work because it's more difficult to re-enter the labor force. The longer somebody is on the bench, the harder it is. And we know that particularly from the last recession where there was extension of benefits for years, those extensions went on for. So you can see also black workers there with much higher or much longer bouts of unemployment. The green bar there is the share that are still filing after October 3rd. So the decrease that we saw in the summer, you know, that helped get a lot of people back to work, but some of these groups still continue to persist in being unemployed. And also in the blue there, the share that indicated that they're permanently separated. And again, if you're permanently separated, you know, obviously not going back to that same job, so have to re-enter the job market in some other capacity, you know, maybe the same occupation, different employer, something like that, but obviously more challenging than just being called back to work. So, you know, we can see here some of the minority races, much higher risk. If we look at it by education, you can see that lower education poses much higher risk here, except for, you can see, it's kind of odd, but some of the share that's permanently separated, that's pretty evenly distributed among the different types of education. Workers with a disability, substantially more at risk, you know, just much more likely to be continued filing, much more likely to be permanently separated, much longer bouts of unemployment. And also, if you look at this by age, you can see that our oldest workers are, you know, experiencing longer bouts, more persistent, and more likely to be permanently separated, but that makes up a very small share of our actual claims. So while their risk of long-term unemployment is high, the odds of them being unemployed is relatively low. This really impacts younger workers significantly more. And a lot of this just comes down to where you work and what you do. So these are the top occupations, the top 65 that have the longest prolonged unemployment. And it really kind of shows you, it really makes sense intuitively that this is all about what you do. And that is why this is impacting minorities at much higher rates, is because they are disproportionately working in service occupations. And these service occupations were shut down, right? Executive orders shutting these down. Same thing with, think about the type of workers that work at fast food restaurants. Much more likely to be a minority, much more likely to be lower educated, much more likely to be younger. All those things stack up. And it's really just the result of accommodation and food services. That's really the big one. It's about 14% of all our claimants. You combine that with retail trade, it's just a significant share. So this is just the food prep and serving related occupations. And unfortunately, those jobs also don't pay very well. That's typically some of the lower paying jobs in our economy. And that means that this is really impacting folks that came into the pandemic earning low wages, meaning they probably didn't have the emergency fund that maybe everybody on this call has. They're also much more likely to be working part-time or seasonal, which decreases your annual take-in. You're starting out at a low hourly wage and you're working fewer hours. That's just a lower annual wage altogether. So it's really kind of the working poor that are bearing the brunt of the recession. It's a little bit different than the Great Recession, where that was strung out among a lot of different industries. This one's really focused in those three: that other services, accommodation and food, and arts, entertainment, and recreation, like our big casinos and stuff. We do still have openings, though. That's kind of like the silver lining, I guess. There are a lot of employers that are trying to hire. Incidentally, a lot of the openings we have are for the same type of people that are being laid off, which is promising for those folks that are, kind of pushing that long-term unemployed. Hopefully they can go back. I guess one of the issues is, will they? The folks that we're having leave the labor force are primarily women, working age women, and our oldest workers. And if you think about working age women, a lot of them are taking care, they're typically the primary caretaker for children and aging adults. And you kind of have to ask yourself, will they come back? This is also causing huge disruption in our childcare systems, adding massive amounts of volatility. While long-term, our demand is still there, short-term demand has kind of fallen out as people stayed home, kept their kids home. So how do we keep our childcare centers operating through some of this volatility? Now, the last thing I'm going to leave on is a new resource that we have for businesses looking to engage students. This is designed for students to use, but it's also really excellent for businesses to have as part of their knowledge portfolio. And I'll have the link here in the next page, but it shows you the most demanded occupations. That's what this chart is showing, just kind of ranking you in demand here. And you can filter it by different career clusters. So on the right side, you can see I filtered it to central Minnesota and looking specifically at manufacturing. And it'll just kind of quick and dirty give you what are the most demanded occupations, what's the average annual or the median annual wage, and how many jobs are there in that. Jobs meaning employment, not openings. And then we also have a whole new page dedicated to kind of the path to workforce success, primarily geared for students, but this would be phenomenal information to share with your parents, because parents, we know, are the primary influence in students' career and education decision making. And if we think about how the pandemic is exacerbating retirements, and if our older workers are going to come back or not, it's much more likely that you'll be hiring a younger person than an older person if those folks don't come back. So probably more emphasis should be put on helping students understand their opportunities rather than less. And there's a super nifty video that we worked on with the Southwest Service Cooperative, but it's kind of a statewide video that shows you, or just kind of explains how to make these decisions to a student. So I thank you very much for your time. I think we're going to take questions at the end, and I'm sure I went way over because of my, my little snafu here.
Okay, and I should add, while King's getting ready to go, if you have any questions, start feeding them into the chat room. That's the one way we can do it.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And I like working with Luke in part because there's a lot of questions he answers that I think I was going to answer, and I've learned how to take slides out of my presentation because it's like, well, Luke's going to handle that. I don't need to deal with that. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity, and as always, I really appreciate the chance to work with Luke, work with you, and to talk about this. So here's a picture of a worker at a local factory, and our question here is to talk about not just the worker piece, but also to talk about the other parts that go into the production of goods and services. And so we talked a little bit about supply chain issues. I think it was in Les's introduction, and I want to talk some about that. And I also want to talk some about the allocation of capital, which is something that's really different. If you want to talk about the things that are different in this recession, there's also something that's the same. Capital in this recession has turned out to be misallocated, but it's misallocated in a way that, whereas in the great financial crisis, we could kind of see it coming, this one we probably just really did not. So let's start at the beginning. If I start, we just got the fourth quarter GDP numbers out. I don't have that built into this. They just came this morning, GDP up 4%, and investment was still, again, quite down, but only a fraction of a percent between December 2019 and December 2020. If I look at unfilled orders, people are having trouble filling their orders. And I look at prices, and the prices are beginning to go up, but they're going up at the rate that GDP number that came out this morning included an inflation estimate of about 1.5%. So they're all pretty much right in line. The one big part here is that if, particularly in the durable goods sector, those manufacturers in quarter three made a number that's higher than any number I can find going back before the great financial crisis. Non-durables are still below the pre-pandemic level, but they did rebound in Q3, so those look pretty good. So I want to talk about a few things. First of all, I want to talk about a supply chain, and my favorite supply chain graphic is this one here. This is a 737 MAX. When a couple of those ended up unexpectedly coming out of the sky, that's my phrase for crashing, that impacted a supply chain that stretched around the world. These are all the various parts that go into making a Boeing 737 MAX and the places where they're made, and you can see that it's a global piece. So while we think of it impacting largely a single factory in Denton, Washington, it actually had impacts around the world. And that it's an illustration for me. Any one of those places that's in trouble causes an issue for many other places as well. I was listening this morning to a broadcast from somebody with the new Biden administration talking about the latest issue in terms of their supply chain management they believe part of their issue with the vaccine is that they need a different type of syringe. I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but it basically has less waste in it at the bottom of the syringe after you give an injection. There's a little bit of the vaccine in there that gets tossed. If you have less of that, that allows the vial to actually give us an extra dose. They're actually ordering and taking priority to get tons of those doses. So supply chain issues are huge in this area. A lot and the reason we talk about supply chains is because a lot of what's in the goods and services that you produce are intermediate inputs. So if you're making durable goods, the value added, in other words, what happens in your factory, if you're manufacturing a durable good, is about 40% of the value. The rest of it is intermediate inputs that you bought from someplace else and are built into the cost of the product you're selling. For non-durables, it's about 2/3. And you can see that's different than in the construction sector. That's different than what's in the healthcare sector. Supply chains matter more for the production of goods than for the production of services. Healthcare is just one I can look at and get a pretty good comparison to, and also looking at the construction sector. That amount of that you're outsourcing, those are percentages along the left-hand column. You can see, depending on what you produce, your material costs and seeing how much the material costs. If you're making motor vehicles, so if you think about a New Flyer, about 70% of their price of their product is built in from the cost of the inputs, material inputs they're putting in. There's also services you're purchasing from other places, and they also get put into the cost, but it's a lot less. So if you're going to think about what's happening in manufacturing in this recession, and again, Luke has done a nice job of telling you already, particularly looking at employment, how different manufacturing has been. One thing that's been extraordinarily different has been the disruption to the supply chain. And let me show you a few examples of that. Here's the most recent information on the movement of goods along rail car loads and then rail intermodal containers, which is still, I think, perhaps one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century is the container. That goes the container that goes on the back of a tractor trailer that moves through places and can be just put onto a train in one place and taken off the train and delivered the last mile. You can see that rail car loads are still running a little bit below. That's not too much. I mean, look at the scale on that number there. And then the similar scale, not identical, on the other side for rail intermodal. When I see rail intermodal moving at a much higher rate than rail car loads, what that tells me usually is that you're seeing more containers, and that containers usually are things that are moving along ships. That's why you have containers, because it's easier to get them off and on ships in docks. Here's an example of that. This is a picture of the ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles. And each dot on that map is a ship that's either at berth in a dock at one of the two ports, or those that are waiting at anchor, means they're waiting to get in. Those are the dots that are out in the ocean. And this is from a specific day, and you can see that there are lots of container ships that are waiting to get unloaded. While they're waiting, you sitting at the other end, waiting for your material to come from, and this is obviously, since it's Los Angeles and Long Beach, these are ships coming out of Asia for the most part from China. You're waiting for that stuff, for your things to get in, and you're having productivity slowdowns. And you can even see that happening when we have this massive increase in demand. You'll see an increase in prices, and here's two examples. The Baltic Dry Index is a well-known transportation sector measure of the cost of shipping goods from place to place. Look at the dramatic increase that it takes in June and July as the economy begins to open back up and people are able to go out and spend. It just more than doubles in that short period. And you can see particularly there's an index for Shanghai. Okay, that's basically the cost of shipping a ton from Shanghai to the west coast of the United States. It's a conglomerate of 5 different ports. Less than $1,000 in May and June, and now that price is up nearly to 3,000. So that price is almost tripled in about 6 months. Let me turn to, I'm watching my time, but be sure you have enough time to ask a question or two. Let me turn to a little bit of the St. Cloud focus, because I wanted to be concentrated on this. So Luke's done a nice job, and I asked him to go first because I wanted him to talk about the wages and supplement piece. In GDP in the St. Cloud area, okay, total GDP is about, in current dollars, is about $11 billion. About 1.5 to 2 billion of that goes away through taxes to federal, state, and local government. That leaves this remainder here. We get transfer payments from the rest of the country. That leaves the rest. Wages and supplements are 78%, and of the remaining money, that $1.8 billion, that's the surplus that gets built in. And if I drill down and just look at manufacturing, of the $7.2 billion of GDP produced in St. Cloud in 2019, manufacturing represents over $1 billion of it. You're a big part of the GDP of the St. Cloud economy. Even though we've got a huge hospital and I work in an education sector that hires a lot of people, actually manufacturing is a huge producer in our community. So, and of that, you can see 800, about 4/5 of it, actually 22, about 78% of that money gets paid out in wages and salaries and supplements, the benefits that you asked the question about before in our breakout session. And the remainder is about $226 million in 2019. That covers things just like interest income, it covers rent, it covers proprietor income, it covers all of these things. And my question that I want to pose to this audience is basically, what's happened to the capital that's been invested in your businesses and in businesses around this area? Okay, it really depends on what you put your capital in. If you happen to be a manufacturer of bicycles, well, I know because I took up biking this summer because, you know, I needed something to do outside. It was damn hard to find a bike. They were flying off shelves like nobody's business. On the other hand, if you were a person in the business of making sound systems for concerts for bands, you had a lot of extra inventory on the shelf because there's no demand for that stuff right now. You pretty much can't get together and play in many places. And if I look at where we've had investment recently, take a look at this chart. This is all of the bigger projects in the city of St. Cloud that have happened between 2017 and 2020. This is data from the St. Cloud Economic Development Authority. Full disclosure, I'm chair of the EDA board and have been for the last 4 years. So you can see you've got about, these are 97 projects that I've laid out here for you and categorize them according to where that investment happened. You are the lighter blue chunk here, about $23 million invested in industrial production facilities over the last 4 years in the city of St. Cloud. Those investments, by and large, I suspect, will turn out to be pretty good return on investment. Indeed, some folks will be like, man, I got my extra capacity in place just in time because I'm doing a lot of work right now. Hopefully the supply chain doesn't hurt you. But think about this piece over here. You're in the office business, okay? How many of you folks are working from home, right? Suppose I'm in the retail sector. What's happening here? What is happening over here in the area of services? That would be like anything from building a new gas station to a nail salon, which I know Luke has talked about, those personal services. If you built a place to house 5 tanning beds, guess what? That's pretty stranded investment right now. So we wonder about that, and we wonder, when will we find the cure? So here's the hope. coming fairly fast. This is from the Good Judgment super forecasting project, and that super forecasting project shows that by May 31 we'll have 100 million people. We'll have vaccine distributed out to vaccinate 100 million people. I think things are coming. They're just not. We want them to go faster, but you can only do so much. I'm going to blow pretty much past this slide a little bit, but you can see as you try to lay things out. This is from KPMG economics, and as well as the Good Forecasting Project. We really think that the leisure and hospitality sector only picks up pace in the second half of 2019. Let me show you one more thing, and I just found this yesterday, but I was very fascinated in this. When do businesses think that they're going to be coming back? When we were working last spring, and you remember being asked this was a census survey. This is a U.S. Census survey of businesses done in cooperation with the CDC. Back in April and May, those first surveys said, hey, we think we're going to be back in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Well, it's now 10 months later. And for many places, they're not back. So if you look at that dark blue bar and see where we are now, we've got more people now saying, we're not going to be back for 6 months or more, saying that in January. So I think there's more realism. I think people are making pretty informed decisions about how they're investing right now. If I just drill down looking at Minnesota manufacturers and say, when will you return to normal? 25% say, hey, there's been no effect. Everything's turned out all right. But 18% say it's been 4 to 6 months, 4 to 6 months before things return to normal, and 42% think it's more than 6 months until they return to normal. So we asked this question at our December quarterly business report review, and what we found at that time was we asked people that came to our review. This would have been the third week of December, third Thursday in December, and we asked them, when do you expect to take the vaccine? 64% said, as soon as I can get it. You want to do a good deed for everybody? Tell your folks, tell your workers, tell your friends. We only get out of this when everyone takes the vaccine. Encourage them to take the vaccine. It's important. Okay, so I just want to highlight this one piece, question 4 right here for you. So let me close by just saying to you, finding workers is hard. That's certainly true, and I think Luke's explained all that to you. Secondly, supply chains have become distorted so that we've got increased shipping costs as part of the adjustment process. And the thing that I'm looking at, which is different, in the great financial crisis, the capital investment that was stranded, that looked like it was really bad for us, was the housing sector. Now we're going to see different types of things, including some places in commercial real estate. They're going to be difficult for people to figure out, how do I use this space now in a post-COVID world? And that's going to be a question, that's going to be kind of a key question, I believe, for 2021. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to thank you. Thank you for participating with us today. And we'll take, I guess I'll turn it back to Amy and to Les.
All right. Well, thank you, King and Luke and Amy. I think she's watching over questions. One way is to send them in through chat, but if you'd like, you can just signal and we can take them live too, right, Amy?
Yep, I do have one question here in chat for Luke. Luke, employers are still having trouble finding candidates. The question often asked is, are people satisfied with their unemployment benefits and therefore not applying for them for employment?
Sure. So I think that question is getting at how much does the unemployment insurance benefits disincentivize the choice to work? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's the question.
Thanks, Dick.
Sure. So I'll tell you that the research that has come out, and it's very preliminary because a lot of the data it takes a while to get. It goes directly against every bit of feedback I've gotten from employers. So the research, and it's based on like income to try to figure out if people are taking jobs at the same rate as they did if they didn't have these generous unemployment benefits. That research says it's not having an impact. People are still choosing to work. Now, when I talk to employers, I hear a totally different story. And that's likely, because it's just one side, right? And I don't get to connect with job seekers right now, so I don't get to hear their side of it. So anecdotally, certainly. I, like King, we work in economics, we know incentives matter, so I don't know how it couldn't have some sort of negative impact for people choosing to work. The other side of it, and I heard this a few weeks ago, which I thought it was fascinating and maybe even more telling than having an employer tell me they can't hire people, is I had some folks that work in finance tell me that, and anybody that's from the bank here, I'd love to hear their insight here, but the forgivable loans are a struggle for a lot of these companies, because in order to have these PPP loans forgiven, you have to have maintain that employment. Well, how do you maintain that employment if you can't call people back? So, that to me is probably a bit less biased than hearing it directly from an employer, but it makes me wonder, is that really going to be an issue, or is it just a few people's perceptions,
Okay. To Luke's point, are there any bankers that want to answer that question? Anybody want to go on the spot? All right.
I guess I could add, there are exceptions to that rule. There's ways for employers, if they've invited employees back to their payroll and that employee declines for whatever reason, that can be a special, it's a special form that they have to fill out and certify that that employee chose not to come back, and that number can be excluded from the forgiveness calculation.
Is that a pretty common thing to have to do, or is that rare?
I haven't seen it very much. Okay.
So that might actually be the best answer to the original question then. If these forgivable loans are any indication of whether or not people are coming back to the job, then it seems like it's pretty isolated where people are choosing to remain on unemployment insurance.
Luke,
I think the bigger issue is when we had those big balloon bonus payments, the $600, where the majority of people receiving unemployment insurance when that was going on were making more on unemployment than they were at their job. Even pretty well compensated people.
I was just going to add a little quick fact. There was just a report I read in a newsletter yesterday. Only about 400,000 of these new PPP loans have been taken out across the country for about $35 billion of volume. That's like an order of magnitude less than what happened on the first round. So this is second take. You can only take it if you had the loan the previous time, and I think that number is pretty small for a number of reasons.
Okay, I have another question here for Luke and King. Do you see all of the economic activity in Minnesota eventually moving into the Twin Cities? What's the future of greater Minnesota versus the metro area?
Wow, that, like at this point, at least, greater Minnesota fared much better than the Twin Cities, because the Twin Cities is loaded up on the industries that were hit hardest. I wouldn't have a real good answer to that. I would, and a lot depends on broadband. I took it out of my slide deck, but I had a map just even of Stearns County and the spotty coverage that we have for broadband. But that, as that is now being elevated in importance, that will help a lot of companies remain or locate to greater Minnesota. King, you might have more.
Yeah, Luke, and this is a great question. In my mind, one of the major issues, I think you put your finger on one of the major issues. Just here at the university, when we sent all our students to learn remotely, we had to give them lots of different things. We had to give them hotspots. We had to loan out. We've got students trying to do 5 courses online with a cell phone, and probably not the newest model. And so in some cases we needed to offer them a loaner, we outstripped the supply we had, even though we had money from the CARES Act that allowed us to actually stock up on additional equipment if you could find it, because like all the other supply chain issues, finding new laptops was terribly difficult. Finding new hotspots was terribly difficult last summer. I think you've got that same issue here. I think the other issue, and I'm not trying to pass this back to Luke, but I think there's a major issue in terms of what happens in the state in terms of with what happens with labor. Okay, people vote with their feet. How many people are continuing to go down into the Twin Cities to work in that space? We're making it somewhat easier for them to do that. Indeed, I was fascinated in a meeting not too long ago talking about the capacity of North Star Rail, that St. Cloud and the Twin Cities have 2 different attitudes toward North Star Rail. Each of it thinks it's bringing passengers to its place from the other place, right? St. Cloud looks at it as rather than I mean, the Twin Cities thinks, well, we'll build North Star Rail so we can get more workers out of the Twin Cities to the Twin Cities from St. Cloud, and St. Cloud's looking at it like, no. We want it going. We want the trains coming in the other direction. We need the workers. And it's an example because, a train might help us, but a train is not going to help Marshall. It's probably not going to help Moorhead. It's probably not going to, so how we deal in central Minnesota with the labor supply issue is going to be really critical. And I think transportation is a significant part of that story.
Absolutely. And even on that note, I mean, the long-term viability of working remotely is going to change our commuting patterns. If it remains. And I mean, Minnesota's in a bit of a precarious situation too, where we had massive unrest in our biggest metropolitan area. And, how much of a bad taste has that left workers and companies in that area, and what type of impact will that have, if any, to remain downtown, to want to work downtown, to live downtown, all that,
Great, thank you, Luke and King. Any final questions for Luke and King today?
I guess I've got one for King. When I saw your information about supply chain, that appears quite worrisome. Is there a future that will correct itself?
Well, I think there's 2 issues here. There's the issue that what happened really, I think, for a lot of manufacturers, Les, is that they decided to sort of specialize. We're going to have one supply chain that's going to build everything just in time, and it's all going to work out with that one supplier. I think what's likely to happen now is if you're a manufacturer and there's a key component to what you're producing, you're probably not going to want just one supplier anymore. You're going to want to diversify yourself to have a couple, 2, 3, 4 suppliers. That sounds great, but all those parts still have to work. It has to not matter which supplier you're getting the delivery from. And it means that you're not going to be buying as much volume, so chances are your per unit cost is going to rise. I think there are a number. I think this reorienting is going to be important. I think where it might help, particularly here in central Minnesota, is that it might cause some reshoring of some of the intermediate inputs. Rather than buying them from international and having to rely on a supply chain that you now understand can be really disrupted, you might start thinking about maybe I need to build that parts manufacturer closer to me, and maybe they'll start coming back into the US. And you may see businesses wanting to, you may see entrepreneurs thinking to themselves, how do I get into the intermediate input business? How do I become that supplier of an input to a bigger manufacturer who's in my region? Because, you know, I'll have that relationship, and you lose a lot of that uncertainty. So I mean, to me, there's an opportunity in there for, and I think that opportunity, given the skill sets in Minnesota, and particularly in our region, I think that's an opportunity that could have some real value.